How you doing? This is UK Fish ID videos. Through these series of films, I'm going to show you how to identify various British fish, both from the sea and fresh water. We're going to go through what they eat, where they live, and how to identify them from similar species. If you'd like to learn more about identifying UK fish, then why not get my latest book? It's available online and in local bookshops. There's a link in the description if you're interested. This week we're looking at a common one. This is the roach and the rudd. You'd think that it's pretty straightforward to tell them apart, but they can be tricky. So let's get into it. In this video we're looking at roach, rudd, and some of their hybrids and how to positively ID them from each other, as it can be a lot harder than many people realise. So let's start with the roach. I do this in every video as I feel it's very important. You can't positively ID any fish alone by its colour. Fish change colour so rapidly according to health, age, sexual dimorphism, stress, and the environment they live in. So you only use colour as a guide in conjunction with other more accurate signs. So if we look at the roach, they're an adaptable fish and they can thrive in all kinds of water bodies, from lakes, rivers, canals, ponds and dikes, though they're largely absent from upland and fast-running rivers. In terms of distribution, they're both well covered throughout the UK as well, largely absent from the very northern reaches of Scotland, but pretty much the rest of the UK has got good numbers of roach and rudd and likely in similar areas, so we can't use distribution to help us work out which is which either. In terms of size, they both can get to about a maximum of 4 pounds, although that's an exceptionally large fish. Even something at 2 pounds is still considered a large one. More often than not, they're about hand-sized, so we can't use size to tell them apart either. In terms of diet, they also have a pretty similar diet, although I would say that roach lean a little bit more towards aquatic vegetation than they do invertebrates, whereas rudd definitely seem to have a stronger liking to eat moving prey. So what about the actual features of these fish? Well, at first glance, they're small, silvery looking fish with red fins, and a lot of people may easily confuse them, although actually there's a couple of ways that are really easy to tell them apart. So firstly, roach are generally more silver in coloration, and they typically have a bright red eye and a tinge to the fins, which can be quite faint in murky water, but as long as it's relatively clear, there's a decent amount of red in those fins. The mouth is more uniform, and the leading edge of the dorsal fin is in line with the pelvic fins. This is a really useful way of IDing roach and rudd, although obviously you have to have them in the hand to be able to do this. In the summer, some roach will have a brassy tint to the head and the flanks, and this comes from chemicals that they ingest from beetles. The lateral line count is typically between 40 and 45, the lateral line being the little dots along the fish's flank. So what about the rudd? How are they different? Well, in clear water, rudd develop a deep golden colour, though it can often appear silver as well. This is why colour is a very poor way, but generally if the fish is very golden, it's unlikely to be a roach. You do also get ornamental rudd, and you don't get ornamental roach. The eye is more yellow in colour, whereas the roach's is red, and the mouth is upturned. This is to help with surface feeding, which is another behavioural trait, whereas roach, although they will feed on the surface, they don't do it nearly as much as rudd. If the fins are coloured in rudd, and they do look red as well, they're more of a scarlet kind of warm red, whereas with roach it's more of a blood red. Again though, if you're in a murky venue, this is going to be useless. The edge of the dorsal fin doesn't match up with the pelvic fin like it does in the roach, so it's always worth checking this with rudd if you've got them in the hand. The bigger rudd tend to be deeper bodied than roach as well. Roach are more kind of a little bit fatter and slender, whereas rudd tend to be deeper bodied. They also have a longer anal fin than a roach with a slight keel to it. Although the distribution is pretty similar, the habitat is slightly different in that although you can get rudd in rivers, they don't like fast moving ones, and they generally only really live in very slow moving rivers. So chances are if you catch a fish from a river, it's more likely to be a roach than a rudd, although it's not impossible. Rudd definitely favour lakes, ponds than just still water bodies. That doesn't mean you won't find roach there as well, but rudd definitely have a preference for that. Because rudd are also sold in the ornamental fish trade pretty regularly, you get these very deep golden rudd, or kind of more of a copper colour really, and then you also get the silver rudd on sale as well, which means that people often release rudd when they breed into their ponds, so rudd can end up anywhere across the British Isles because they can be dumped from the aquarium trade. The lateral line count on a rudd is 42 to 45, so it's pretty similar to roach to be fair. It's not overly helpful, but it's always worth bearing that in mind. So let's have a look at the hybrids. One thing I should say is that hybrids aren't an exact science and they are hugely variable. Most cyprinid hybrids are fertile also to confuse things, so you could end up with a roach with a smidge of bream in it or a little bit of rudd in it. It's not always a 50-50 split. The most common one is the roach bream hybrid, or roach common bream hybrid, and I would say this is probably the easiest roach hybrid to ID just by looking at it and not having to go too in depth in it. It shares features from both parent species but doesn't quite match either closely. In Ireland, there's a much higher proportion of hybrid cyprinids, and roach bream hybrids are some of the most common. Sometimes young roach bream hybrids are confused with silver bream, but the silver bream has a much bigger eye and clean silver scales. They have a lateral line count of 42 to 54. So lateral line counts for hybrids are really useful because it's going to be much higher than a roach, generally speaking. You also get the roach rudd hybrid. Now this is a really tricky one to tell apart, and few anglers would be able to confidently ID this hybrid. And I suspect they're way more common than people realise. It's just few people take the time to really look at small roach or rudd to see if they could have a touch of hybrid about them. It's a very tricky fish to pin down, but it lacks the red eye of the roach and more of a yellow eye like the rudd. The dorsal fin, however, matches more closely than the ventral fin, a bit like a roach. The mouth is normally more upturned like a rudd. In layman's terms, they essentially look like a rudd with a roach body, and the lateral line count is anywhere from 39 to 46. If you think you've got a rudd roach hybrid, you're going to have to examine that fish pretty damn carefully. They are buggers to ID. Now, as well as the roach bream hybrid, you also get the rudd bream hybrid, and these are perhaps one of the more visually appealing hybrids, as the rudd bream hybrid is a stunner. It has the best qualities of both parent species shining here, with metallic bronze / gold flanks and muddy red fins. Again, Ireland seems to be a hotspot for them, but they do turn up in England also, often in commercial fisheries. This hybrid doesn't get as big as a bream when mature, but can still have some bulk to it. The fins are dark, but the flanks take on a similar lustre of rudd, in which they are a wonderful brassy bronze colour. The mouth is also upturned like a rudd, but with a deeper bream body, and a lateral line count of 46 to 50. Now, to also add in a little bit of confusion, both rudd and roach also hybridise with silver bream. However, I'll fully admit I'm not an expert on silver bream hybrids, and they're very difficult to ID compared to other species, mainly because silver bream have a much more limited distribution. Silver bream roach hybrids, again, they look a bit like a bream roach hybrid, but they're smaller and more silver in coloration, and a silver bream rudd hybrid again look like a bream rudd hybrid, but with that more silver coloration. But if you're catching these fish from a more muddy venue, those colours are going to be muted and they're going to be much more difficult to ID. So if you're fishing a venue that's got a lot of rudd, a lot of roach and a lot of silver bream, you have to really examine those fish because there could be a touch of hybrid in them. So what are the key traits to tell a rudd and a roach apart? Well, firstly, and in my opinion the best way, is that rudd have an upturned mouth, and on roach it's more level. Obviously, if you're just looking at the fish from above, you're not really going to be able to see that. But if you've caught the fish or you've got a good photo of the fish, the mouth is one of the quickest ways to tell the difference between the two. The dorsal fin on a rudd is further back, while on a roach it's pretty much level with the ventral fins. So again, if you've caught the fish or you've got a decent picture of the fish, you can work this one out. I don't tend to go by colour as mentioned, but rudd can either be a carrot orange, copper colour or a bright gold, while roach tend to be more silver, sometimes even a bluey tinge to them, especially in clear water. However, If in murky water, they can pretty much look the same washed out grey colour as each other. So you should be able to tell them apart as long as you can get a good look at both fish. Don't forget, if you want to learn more about UK fish, do grab a copy of my book. There's a link in the description if you want to find out more. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing to the channel. It takes 2 seconds for you and it really helps the channel out. Go and have a look at some of the other UK Fish ID videos we've got on the channel, as well as the underwater and angling content on here. See you next time. Cheers. If you enjoyed this vid, why not check out this other video right here? If you can, please subscribe to the channel. It only takes a couple of seconds and it really helps me out. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.